Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Tuesday, December the 31st, 2024. So today I will be doing my final reading for 2024. Tomorrow's a new year, and as always, looking at the astrology and the I Ching. But my main topic is going to be Jimmy Carter, who died over the weekend, and I want to look at his horoscope and consider perhaps his strengths and his weaknesses. And in some respects, he was a rather unlucky president, and maybe that was connected with the Jupiter-Saturn cycle. But anyway, I'll be looking at Jimmy Carter later on in this video. And first of all, I want to look at the astrology and I Ching for today, which is December the 31st, 2024. Usual reminder, if you do enjoy this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. And if you're not subscribed, I would be super grateful if you were to subscribe, because it does make a difference to the channel and it doesn't cost you anything. Anyway, here is the astrology for today. So this is set for New York, December the 31st, 2024 at noon. And there is the new moon. So we've just had a new moon, and that new moon we had sort of yesterday, maybe earlier today. It kind of depends on your time zone. But we still have sort of a strong Capricorn feel to the day. Moon is in Capricorn throughout the day, wherever you are. And I mean, it's good that it's just after a new moon. I think that the end of a lunar cycle has been quite difficult. I think since the full moon, for example, certainly the markets have fallen. And I'm making this video on sort of a Monday morning, and everything is sharply down. And maybe that is connected with the fact that it is the end of the cycle, and maybe the new moon will bring something different, and there'll be sort of greater optimism once the new cycle starts. No guarantees though. And I suppose with that new moon in Capricorn, it's a time where many of us are thinking about what needs to be done. I mean, this new moon is in earth signs, so there is an encouragement to think about practical stuff and not getting too sidetracked by New Year's Eve and all the celebrations and whatever, because, you know, tomorrow's another day. Tomorrow's January the 1st, so, you know, we've got to get on with it. And so that might be the main attitude that people have. And this new moon, it's sextile Saturn. Earlier in the day, there is a sextile to Saturn. You can see that moon in Capricorn would make that sextile to Saturn. It's also making a trine to Uranus. So moon trine Uranus provides a certain amount of excitement, and you know, one might be thinking, if one went to a party, what would it be like? Well, moon is going to a trine of Uranus. But Uranus is not a traditional planet. It provides something slightly out of the ordinary, but is it really dramatic? You could argue that the moon is void. In other words, the moon has made its last aspect before leaving the sign. So with the void moon, it may well be that if you go out partying this evening, there may be a sense of what was the point in that. It may just feel that ultimately it was a waste of time, and that it might have been better to stay at home and do things more practical and not exhaust yourself. I mean, that could be the view. I mean, it is the moon in Capricorn void. You know, what is the point? in wasting time, even wasting money. Yeah, sure, the moon makes a trine to Uranus, but so what? It provides some excitement, but perhaps not enough excitement to be making it worth your while. Yeah, the moon is also kind of making a sextile to Neptune. That might be into tomorrow. Again, depends on your time zone. So that's the moon. And actually, that's all that's going on. From an astrological perspective, at least a geocentric perspective, there's not actually a great deal to report, except the fact that it is after the new moon. New moon is now waxing, so perhaps there's a greater sense of optimism as we move into 2025. And in some quarters there has been sort of pessimism as the year winds down, especially with the markets, with Jerome Powell saying he's not, certainly in the US, Jerome Powell saying he's not going to put up interest rates very much next year, at least assuming the current situation. Of course, we don't know. Things can change. Now, if you're in Sydney, Australia, the moon is going to be earlier in the sign, earlier in Capricorn. So this chart covers Australia and New Zealand. You can see that the moon at noon is at 11 Capricorn. So if you're in Australia and New Zealand, that new moon is far more immediate. It really does feel that it is right at the beginning of the lunar cycle, and the moon really is making that sextile to Saturn, and that trine to Uranus is more about tomorrow. So moon sextile Saturn, that's a nice aspect. A new beginning with this new moon, getting off to a solid a solid start. There's less of a feeling that the moon is void of course, but the moon to Saturn is 3 degrees off. So still by this evening, particularly late this evening, the moon will be void of course. I don't think that's something you can avoid. So there's not a huge amount of difference between the astrology of Australasia, Australia, New Zealand, and the astrology of say America and Europe. So that's the geocentric picture, but I must emphasize there's not a great deal going on. And then we have the heliocentric picture. Now, heliocentrically, there are a few things going on which possibly should be noted. So let me just for one thing, we have got an opposition aspect between Mercury and Chiron, and so that Mercury-Chiron opposition, I suppose we could say that Mercury is about how we articulate ourselves, and Chiron could be the maverick. We may feel in the dying embers of the year that we somehow need to make some effort to get noticed, to say something that maybe forces people to stop and think. So that's one way in which this Mercury-Chiron opposition could work. I mean, Mercury opposition Chiron could, I suppose, in certain situations relate to a certain amount of self-pity, I suppose, if you take Chiron as being the wounded healer, and perhaps people communicating in such a way that wants to demonstrate their wounds. I'm not saying that you've got an issue of self-pity, it may be someone else. This is not personal, this doesn't relate to the signs, it's just general, the kind of world we're living in. So maybe if you go to a party or you're mixing with people today, you just might find that they're talking about themselves and their own problems and miserable me and all of this kind of thing. So that might be one way in which Mercury opposition Chiron is working. A more constructive way for Mercury opposition Chiron to work would be to perhaps to be a little bit daring in terms of what you say, to sort of push for limits of acceptability. But obviously you don't want to go over the top, but it might be a good idea to get attention, but in a fairly gentle way. But probably the main aspect today, not necessarily the main aspect, but the most important aspect is Earth semi-square Uranus. And there is Earth at 1031 Cancer, and it's making a 45-degree aspect to Uranus. So with that 45-degree aspect to Uranus, that might mean events and things happening that we hadn't necessarily planned for, but events taking place maybe on a sort of global level. It needn't be personal. Perhaps it won't be personal. It is a heliocentric chart, and the heliocentric chart is incredibly impersonal because there is no ascendant and there is no moon. I mean, there is a moon, but there's no point in putting a moon in because the moon is pretty much in the same place as the Earth is from the sun's perspective. Other things going on. Well, Venus is still sextile Mars. And so we've got that. So Venus sextile Mars, I suppose, is about attractiveness and getting attention because of one's attractiveness. So I suppose efforts to be attractive may work. And Venus is actually on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. I mean, it's moving away from a Mars-Saturn midpoint, but you can see that there's Mars moving towards a trine of Saturn. So Mars trine Saturn. There is a certain sense of discipline there with Mars trine Saturn, and Venus on the Mars-Saturn midpoint, there may just be a feeling that, one wants to try to be attractive, perhaps. There's also a certain amount of self-consciousness with that Venus on the Mars-Saturn midpoint, and so it may not be great. I mean, Venus sextile Mars is nice. Venus sextile Saturn is nice, but Venus on the Mars-Saturn midpoint can be a bit grueling, and it may represent, I suppose if one wants to be symbolic about it, one could say Venus on the Mars-Saturn midpoint would be a woman who feels sorry for herself. I mean, that could be it. If you take could be a younger woman who feels sorry for herself. But honestly, the heliocentric chart is very general, so I wouldn't necessarily take that too personally. And really, that's about it. Now, because there's not a great deal going on geocentrically, this may be reflected in what I say for the 12 signs. I think I might be saying a little less than usual, but anyway, we'll see. Anyway, so now let's talk about the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for the last day of the year, which is Tuesday, December the 31st, 2024. Aries. So Aries, I think that you're still feeling the new moon, and that new moon was in Capricorn, and I think that new moon for you was fairly motivating. I think it encouraged you, or is encouraging, or it's in the process of encouraging you to be more focused on what matters to you, and you believe that there are important things that need to be done, perhaps need to be planned, that need to be accomplished, and you perhaps have a certain sense of mission. And this might mean that you don't actually want to get distracted by the fact that it is New Year's Eve. I understand New Year's Eve, things are closing down. Tomorrow, January the 1st, is a holiday, but that's not quite you. You're not quite into the spirit of things like that. You want to do something useful with the moon in Capricorn. I mean, I think you might sort of ease up a little when the moon moves into Aquarius tomorrow. So January the 1st, the moon will be in Aquarius. So that might allow you to be a little more relaxed, even though the moon is making a conjunction to Pluto. But right now, I think you perhaps take the view that you don't want to waste time, and if you feel that your time is being wasted, there is a danger that you might sort of lash out. You might say something that could be inappropriate, and that's because there is heliocentrically a square aspect between Mercury and Mars. So that's something that is getting to you, I think. And I think you're also going to be influenced by the fact that Mars is going retrograde, and Mars obviously continues to go retrograde, and it will stay retrograde until February I think it's sort of mid-late February. So with Mars going retrograde, that could actually represent a certain sense of frustration, especially as Mars is moving towards the opposition of Pluto. In a few days' time, that Mars-Pluto opposition is going to be exact, and it just might feel that you just can't do everything that you want to do, and yeah, that is frustrating. And Aries, I think you really want to somehow find a way of unleashing your power with Mars opposition Pluto. And you may indeed be concerned that some people have more power than you. And so if you happen to be socializing today, I think that you could be more aware than usual about the power dynamics of the situation. And so that's not entirely comfortable for you, and you're going to be distracted, and I think it's actually going to be quite difficult for you to just relax over the next couple of days, even when the moon goes into Aquarius tomorrow, because I think you have priorities and you are quite focused on yourself. And I think actually that is just the way it is, and I think you should perhaps honor this. And maybe with the moon making a sextile to Saturn, particularly at the beginning of the day, though that moon sextile Saturn is kind of operational as you move into the new year. I mean, it may not be that the aspect is exact, but the moon is in Capricorn, Saturn is in Pisces. Saturn rules the moon. Well, Saturn doesn't rule the moon, but Saturn rules the sign that the moon is in. And so as you move from one year to the next, just doing something that you regard as important is perhaps what you should be doing. And I think maybe you should just forget about the fact that it's a new year. It's beside the point. And anyway, the real beginning was with the new moon. New moon happened on Monday or perhaps early on Tuesday. That was the beginning. This sort of rather fake event of human-created calendars on midnight, January the 1st. It's all a bit arbitrary, and astrologically, it's not the point. So maybe, Aries, you should just forget about the new year and forget about regarding the new year as being special, and just do what you feel is important. Taurus, the sun and the moon are in Capricorn. It's just after the new moon, and I think it's kind of nice that the new moon is over, that the moon is now waxing, and the moon isn't completely dead on the conjunction with the sun, because obviously by definition the new moon is when the sun and the moon are conjunct. But it's kind of nice that new moon is separating a little, and the moon is also making a trine to Uranus in Taurus. So I think today could be quite exciting. It could be fun, and I think the important thing today is that you really appreciate yourself as an individual, and you make sure that other people show you the same appreciation. And so it's okay to be different, and it's certainly not a day for just following the crowd. I mean, that's not helpful, because you have something very unique to offer, and at the same time you shouldn't just be satisfied with what's in front of you, because there are things to explore, there are things to realize, and I suppose that can sometimes be the experience of New Year's Eve, particularly if you're meeting people. I suppose if people are more sociable than usual, you might meet people who have some insight that hadn't really occurred to you before. So that's how you should understand other people. So if you are going to have a sociable day, a sociable evening. It's all about how you can benefit. And it's not just about having fun. It's about learning something new and just seeing something from a different perspective. And if you can do that, then I think that it can be quite a profitable day. Now, there are still some concerns here that you might be thinking about things or just dealing with things that are perhaps not pleasant. Not that they're unpleasant for you. It's just there's a certain tendency at the moment, Taurus, for you to attract unpleasant things. And I must make it clear, but I don't mean that in the sense that life is going to be made unpleasant for you. It may be that you come across information that is unpleasant, or you come across stories that are unpleasant. And then there may, in fact, Taurus, be a certain attraction to things that are unpleasant and things which normally people don't want to think about, don't want to talk about, don't want to discuss, but somehow you get a feeling for it. And that may be about how you understand the world, and it is about expanding your horizons and understanding what is available out there, and what is available out there but you do not want anything to do with. And so that could be part of a process in terms of what is happening today. And it is a day when it's important that you are in control, because you can be in control, and there is something about you that has a certain amount of authority. People know who you are, and they know where you stand. And if you are unhappy about something doesn't seem right, perhaps because it is unpleasant, or you can see the potential for unpleasantness, then, Taurus, you should not be afraid of being open about your feelings. Just say it as it is, and you will come over as very authoritative, and people will listen to you, and they'll make the necessary adjustments. So, don't be shy. Don't feel that it's not appropriate for you to assert yourself. It is appropriate to assert yourself, because if you feel that something is right or something is wrong, then today, Taurus, I think you need to honor those feelings, because those feelings exist for a purpose, and I don't think that you will have got it wrong. So, overall, Taurus, it's a day when you can learn stuff, when you can get information, when you can get a new perspective, but it's also a day when you can demonstrate that you have a certain amount of moral authority. Gemini, the Sun and the Moon continue to move through Capricorn. And so in the aftermath of this new moon in Capricorn, I think, Gemini, you're feeling somewhat restrained. I wouldn't have said you're quite your normal self. I think that there is a tendency, Gemini, to sort of hold things back. You just don't feel that you need to have huge amounts of attention. And I don't think that you're in a particularly sociable mood. So if you go out tonight, or if you're celebrating the new year, I don't think you're going to quite be with it. But then I think a lot of people won't be with it. I don't think it's necessarily a New Year's Eve to remember for anyone, and I think that you would, in many cases, just prefer to be somewhere else. And as far as you're concerned, perhaps there are other things to worry about, to be distracted by. And I think part of the problem, perhaps, we've got the moon making a square to Chiron, is that if you were to meet lots of people today with that moon square Chiron, you might find that they're perhaps talking about themselves, and they're talking about themselves and their problems, and that's one way it could manifest. And there just might be a general feeling that just things aren't happening, and that you fundamentally are distracted. And so if you're distracted, perhaps you need to hunt down the source of the distraction. What would you rather be doing? Well, I suppose, what would you rather be doing? Well, you would probably rather be doing something you enjoy, something you're good at all day, and really putting a lot of effort into something that you enjoy, and not just enjoy, but something that you're also good at. I mean, that's important. And if you just go with the New Year vibe, then you're not going to be the life and soul of the party, and you might instead be sort of skulking on the perimeter, and that's not a situation you want to be in. So I would have said, Gemini, just trust your instincts, and if you feel pressurized to do anything, well, you can always turn that pressure down. You have a judgment about the situation, and I just don't think that social activities are going to work very well over the course of the day. Cancer, it's likely that other people are going to be quite demanding. I mean, we've got the sun and the moon in Capricorn. We've just had a new moon in Capricorn. Okay, the moon is now sort of moving away from the sun, but still there are other people to consider, and you might not want to consider them, but I think you need to certainly make some effort. It doesn't need to be a great deal of effort, and I think it's not necessarily going to take very much to make people happy. Maybe you just have to say something nice. That might be all it takes. And do consider other people's plans. I mean, you might have your own plans, but are you really going to be able to put your own plans into action? Probably not, unless your own plans are all about trying to accommodate other people. And I think there is that accommodation, and you may be asking yourself, whether it's really worth it. We've just had the new moon. The moon, which is representative of you, is in Capricorn, which is in its detriment in Capricorn, and it's close to the sun, and so you're not really in the mood for really sticking your neck out. That's not something you want to do. I think caution over the day is going to be important. Yeah, sure, you understand that other people matter, but you do to an extent have to accommodate them. But also, you are thinking about yourself and your own interests. And so you kind of have to get the balance right. Give people what they need. Make them happy, but don't go too far. Do enough, and that's probably sufficient. And also the moon is making a square to Chiron, and so with that moon square Chiron, there are different ways we can see that moon square Chiron. That may be with that moon square Chiron that you are in a situation where you feel you have to demonstrate that you are different. You don't want to do it because you're concerned about the impact, but at the same time you might feel that you have to do it. Because if you don't, your identity gets ignored. So you have to show people who you are, what's important to you, and what makes you different. And also moon square Chiron, you might be impacted by someone's pain, other people's pain. Maybe other people's pain is being inflicted upon you. Remember when we looked at the heliocentric chart, there was an opposition aspect between Mercury and Chiron. And so I did suggest that one possibility with Mercury opposition Chiron is that people might want to talk about all their problems and sort of even perhaps dump their problems onto other people. And so be a bit wary about that. And maybe you don't want to get caught up in another person's web with that moon square Chiron, because once people start talking about their problems, they can just go on, and it might be rather difficult for you. So overall, Cancer, I don't want to say more than I have to. I think it's just important to get the balance right. Sure, you have to do it. You have to take into account other people, because the Sun and the Moon are in Capricorn, your opposite sign. Yet, on the other hand, you do have to think about your own interests and your own needs, and I think right now they are very important to you with Moon in Capricorn, and so look after them as well, and somehow get the balance right. And as far as having a fun New Year's Eve, well, as I think I'm telling a lot of people, I don't think it's necessarily going to be a fun New Year's Eve. I don't think this is going to be a New Year's Eve to remember. Okay, some people are going to have a great evening. It's just astrology. Sometimes astrology just overgeneralizes things, but I wouldn't make any special efforts today, not least because the moon is void. The moon has made its last major aspect before leaving the sign, a major aspect to a traditional planet. Yes, the moon makes a trine to Uranus, but the Uranus is not a traditional planet. It's a discovered planet. So, as the moon is void, yeah, sure, there might be some excitement on the way, but it's excitement which will never develop. And it could suck you in. It's something that seems to be going somewhere, but actually it's going nowhere. So perhaps excitement, well, it should be left for another day, and don't get distracted. And try not to have too many expectations. I mean, no one should have any expectations for today. Leo, it is a day when we've got the Sun in Capricorn, as always. The Sun's going to be in Capricorn for another few more weeks before it goes into Aquarius. And we've got the Moon in Capricorn, and with the Sun and Moon in Capricorn, things are perhaps a little bit slow. And indeed, you would like them to be slow. I don't think that you're in a hurry to make things happen, and you just want to sort of take things at your pace, and you feel that maybe you haven't got all the time in the world in terms of worrying about other people's needs. You've got your own responsibilities to deal with. That is the nature of the sign Capricorn. That is especially the nature of the sign Capricorn in the Leo chart. And some Leos may feel that what they really want to do is just have everything in place, just well organized, so that as you move into the new year, nothing changes, nothing has to be, nothing has to upset your peace of mind. And remember that routines are always fragile. Always fragile. So you set up a routine for yourself and you do it day in, day out. But one interruption to that routine can wreck the routine. It kind of sets a precedent. So if you've decided you want to do something and you want to do it today and you want to do it tomorrow and the day after and so forth, you don't want to have one day where everything is turned upside down, because you may not recover from it. I mean, may not recover from it, or rather the routine may not recover from it. So if you feel today that you're getting into the pattern of something, and I think many Leos will, then what you don't want is something to get in the way with that get in the way of that pattern. So in that sense, maybe you should be actually quite selfish about it and really just keep doing it and not changing anything. If you do something at a particular time of day, or want to do something at a particular time of day, then do it at that particular time of day. Don't change that time because someone's pressurizing you. And the main aspect today, well, there's not a great deal happening astrologically, but the main aspect is Moon trine Uranus, and that Moon trine Uranus is it's in itself quite an interesting aspect. It represents something new, and it also perhaps represents your determination. You may have a determination to go through with a change, and this may be about what I was talking about with routines. How do you change everything? And I suppose if you're looking for a change in your life, creating the right routine and sticking with it, because that's what causes the disruption. It's like, I don't know, I've been a vegetarian for a long time, so I remember, when you become vegetarian and you make a decision to be a vegetarian, or whatever, whether it's giving up smoking, giving up something, whatever it is, when you make some kind of decision like that, it seems trivial, but then you do it every day, and then things start changing around you. You often find that you go somewhere and people stop eating meat, because it's such an inconvenience having to deal with someone who themselves decided to stop eating meat, that it just messes everything up for everyone else. And so it could be, Leo, that in terms of you having an impact, you change something in yourself and you are absolutely clear about this. You are brutally resilient, and then everyone else is forced to change around you. And this may apply to your family, and it may apply to, if appropriate, the way you do business, or if you're working, then it might also apply. Now, by the way, if you are working today and it's New Year's Eve, I actually think that you can be quite successful in your own quiet way, and you can start to institute some kind of change. And it's not a change that has to be advertised. And it goes back to perhaps what I was saying. You change your routine. You do things slightly differently. Don't advertise the fact, but you still just you do it, but you do things differently, and suddenly everything starts to change. And people don't really know why it's happening sometimes. And so perhaps, Leo, you're more powerful than you realize, and through your actions and perhaps through your stubbornness, you might end up getting an interesting reaction from, or counter-reaction from other people. Virgo, I have been somewhat pessimistic in my readings for the 12 signs. Pessimistic, I mean, perhaps in a rather puritanical sense. I mean, I suppose I do have a puritanical streak, but I've been suggesting that maybe this New Year's Eve is not going to be much fun, and there's no point in making an effort. The moon is void of course. The moon has made its last aspect but to a traditional planet before leaving a sign. So I have been a bit downbeat, but For you, Virgo, I think actually is some scope for you to sort of get into the spirit of things. I mean, I suppose it's New Year's Eve, isn't it? And that is because we've just had this new moon in Capricorn, and Capricorn is an earth sign. It's the fifth sign from Virgo, if we count Virgo as number 1, Libra number 2, Scorpio number 3, Sagittarius number 4, Capricorn number 5. So it's the fifth sign from Virgo, and so it's it has a sort of fifth house feel, and fifth house is often associated with creativity and enjoyment and being able to get a real sense of who you are and what you've got to contribute. And so with this new moon, which we had yesterday or perhaps early today, I think that you can perhaps enjoy yourself, and it can be a New Year's Eve which is quietly satisfying, a feeling that you're in the right place. I'm not saying it's going to be huge drama, but I think that if anyone could even be the life and soul of a party. Well, I don't think anyone's going to be quite the life and soul of a party, but I think there is certainly the possibility of quiet enjoyment. And also we have got the moon trine Uranus. So the moon is in Capricorn, which you could say from a Virgo perspective is a sign connected with enjoyment. It's trine Uranus. Uranus kind of stirs things up. It creates some action. And of course, the moon and Uranus are both making a sort of trine aspect of Virgo, your sign. So I do think that you can have a good time, and don't be afraid of being original, creating new things. There is going to be a shortage of ideas today in many quarters, but if anyone can come up with ideas, come up with plans, come up with ways of having fun, it's going to be you. And so that might not be the kind of responsibility you want, but I mean, you don't perhaps have to take on any responsibility. Just do what is natural. Not everyone can be natural. A lot of people are quite forced about things, but you can be as natural as is possible. And so maybe Virgo, you are potentially a good person to have around. And also, Virgo, it's just very important not to be shy about what you can do, and tell people about what you can do. Tell people about your abilities, because they really do want to hear, regardless of the situation. And if you put a lot of effort into something that you're good at, I don't think you're going to be disappointed with results. I think you're going to exceed your expectations, and at the same time you may actually exceed other people's expectations. So, looking at all of the 12 signs, Virgo, I would have said of the 12 signs, I would probably say that, at least in a relative sense, you're perhaps in the best position today. So if I was to give today a star rating for you, at least in a relative sense, I think I'd probably give you 5 stars, or at least 4.5 stars. Libra, we have this. We have just had a new moon, and this new moon is in Capricorn, and so I think that today you do not really want to be adventurous, not really, and it's like yesterday. I think you would just prefer to be where you're comfortable, and I think you should stick with it. I mean, there may be temptations to do things, go places, but is it really worth the effort? I think that if you go places, you might not feel comfortable, and you're not going to enjoy yourself, I don't think. So it might be best to just stay where you are. And if you're celebrating the new year, then celebrate it at home. Maybe people can visit you, but you don't want too many people visiting you. I think it's a day when, Libra, you by and large want to be in control, and you don't want to be distracted, and you also, I think, perhaps want to avoid difficult people. I mean, there is an opposition aspect between Mars and Pluto coming up. Now, this Mars-Pluto opposition, it isn't exact for a couple of days, but it's getting really close. And Mars opposition Pluto, it could represent someone who spoils the party. That could be one interpretation of it. Someone who's very obsessed on their specialness. Mars in Leo, and Mars can represent another person, perhaps someone you know well, who insists on getting attention. So that might mean that if you're organizing parties and get-togethers, look at who you're dealing with. Maybe the new year, you want to be open-minded and tolerant. But if anyone has created problems in the past, they're going to create problems again, I think. And I think Mars opposition Pluto might have something to do with that. And it may not just be one person. It may be people trying to defend themselves. Defending their egos. They feel they need to protect their fragile egos, so they may have to go out of their way to do it. And in the process, they could attract a lot of attention, and it's not the kind of attention that you really want to have to bother with. And also, Libra, I think it would be a good idea to be aware of your own fundamental authority. You do have authority. You might not feel you have, but as soon as you try to assert your authority, for example, telling people what is right and what is wrong, what is appropriate, what is not appropriate, if you start to assert your authority, you will straight away get a favourable reaction. It will be quite clear that you're in the right. And so you therefore shouldn't be worrying about what other people might think. If something needs to be said, if you need to lay down the law, then today would be a great day to do it, because I think you'll get away with it. And actually, it's not really about getting away with it. It might actually be a certain sense of responsibility here, because if something is going wrong, if something isn't right, or you just feel that, and you actually have the ability to change it, to assert yourself and make it clear that certain things are intolerable. And if you do that, you might be surprising. People might not quite know how to respond, but they will, I think, respond with respect. So yes, Libra, if you need to assert yourself, go and assert yourself. But overall, main thing about today is stick to what you know and trust, and don't go to places that you're unfamiliar with. Scorpio, it's kind of more of the same. When I was talking about yesterday was Monday. I was indicating that in many respects you're going to be able to communicate very well. You don't have to say too much. You can communicate with your feelings and with your body language, and I think that in general people will get the message, and whatever is there in your mind will be communicated. Don't necessarily think, Scorpio, that you can keep things secret. I mean, you might like to keep things secret. I mean, you are a Scorpio, but it's going to be difficult to hold everything together. And so, Scorpio, be a little careful there, particularly if you're feeling impatient or frustrated. And I think there is that possibility because of Mars. You know, Mars is your ruler. As I've already told you, Mars is making an opposition to Pluto. And so with Mars opposition Pluto, there are just things you just might feel annoyed about. You feel you can't fully express yourself, and there are issues of power. And so if you are deciding to celebrate New Year's Eve with other people, power issues are going to be fairly obvious, I think. You know, who has the power, who doesn't have the power. And remember what I just said, it's going to be difficult for you to keep things secret. So if you feel that you don't have enough power, if you feel that in some way you are frustrated or you're being ignored or disregarded, it's going to be very difficult for you to keep that to yourself. And so it's possible that any uptightness or annoyance that you might feel might actually be obvious. So you could actually be an open book. So maybe today you should always ask yourself how you feel. And if you're feeling fine, if you're not feeling frustrated, if you feel relaxed, well, that's okay. But as soon as you start feeling annoyed or aggravated, then perhaps do something about it. Maybe it would be time to withdraw. Or if you're wondering whether to do something today, then ask yourself how you feel. And if you don't feel right about it, if you feel impatient, then maybe you should skip it. So do monitor, what is going on. But you do have a lot of power. I mean, there's no doubt about that. I mean, Mars is still very prominent. It's in early Leo. It's in a very high-profile part of your chart. And so with Mars with this high-profile position, opposition Pluto, you can certainly get what you want. And if you're not happy with anything, you can just stop the flow. But getting what you want is one thing. I mean, that's great to be able to get what you want. But you also have to think, what is the implication of getting what you want? Because there is an issue of power here. So if you get what you want, that might mean that someone else doesn't get what they want. And so that could cause a certain amount of unpleasantness. And also, you're quite capable of being disruptive today. And it's just easy to be disruptive. Once you've disrupted things once, you can do it again and again and again. But again, do you want to be disruptive? And do you want to just be negative for the sake of being negative? And maybe it being New Year's Eve, maybe you should just let people get on with it and not feel that you have to interfere. And if people want to do things, you let them get on with it, but you don't necessarily have to participate. Though I don't know, in terms of communicating with your feelings, I think you're quite good at it. Yes, you might reveal a lot about yourself and your inner feelings, but maybe there are some things that do need to be communicated. You're going to have, I think, no difficulty getting your message across. It's just you have to think about what is the impact of that message. And if you feel that message is going to have a negative impact, then then maybe you should hold back and not even be in other people's company. Because the trouble about being in other people's company is it's just going to be difficult to keep things secret. It's going to be difficult to keep your thoughts to yourself. Now, it's fine if you don't have negative thoughts, but if you do have a lot of negative thoughts, then it just may be difficult to keep that to yourself. So it's possibly a sort of a complicated day when I think you have to have a good understanding of yourself and also a good understanding of the impact you can have on your environment. Sagittarius. Sagittarius, it's a day when, you can make things happen. It's often a day when Sagittarians are much in demand because Sagittarians have that sparkling personality which is often very fitted to this kind of seasonal activity, like New Year or like Christmas, and you can perhaps come into your own. But what about this New Year's Eve? To what extent are you able to make things happen? Well, you can certainly make things happen. I mean, there's no doubt about that. And if you want something to unfold, it can unfold. If you want to assert yourself, sure, you can do it. But are you going to feel any great sense of satisfaction? I mean, I think it is a difficult time for everyone in a way, because I mean, maybe not Virgos, but for most of the signs, it's not a great New Year's Eve. It just may feel that however hard you try, it's just difficult to get a response. And it just may be that from a social perspective, sure, you can make things happen, you can create excitement, but it's like you have to constantly make the effort. It's like starting a fire. You start a fire, but somehow you're not in the right mood for lighting a fire. You've got to be in the right frame of mind, and you just keep having to put kindling on because it keeps going out. Maybe the wood's damp, and you constantly have to blow at it. It's like that. There's a lot of damp wood around, and it's difficult to create a blaze, and so it just takes a lot of effort to create anything. And so that might be how it feels today. And there might be a certain responsibility on your part. You might feel that responsibility to make things happen. But how much energy have you got? How much kindling do you have to provide to keep this fire going? And by the time you get the fire going, it may be too late. So from a social perspective, I wouldn't have too many expectations, and I don't feel that it's down to you to make things happen. Sometimes the materials are just not good enough. Maybe it's just like damp wood, and that's just the way it is. Now, there is a new moon. The new moon may have been yesterday, early today. This is new moon in Capricorn, and the moon is trine Uranus. And to be honest, that new moon, that Capricorn impact could be about money. I mean, I think I talked about money yesterday, and I think there is a financial emphasis, and perhaps as a Sagittarius, you find that somewhat irritating. That's not really what you want to be concerned about. But it just may be, Capricorn, that money does make itself felt, that you feel that the money is an issue. And you're just aware that things have a price. Even if people are trying to enjoy themselves, you are aware that things have a price, and it may be a price that you feel you don't really want to pay. And so, it might seem demeaning to have to worry about what something costs, but it's a reasonable concern. And I mean, I suppose what you don't want to do is, for example, spend money today on, for example, trying to enjoy yourself, going out to places, expensive meals, and so on. that's not where you want to spend money, because I think it's going to be very difficult for you to get a return on that money in terms of enjoyment. So I think that it's okay with your money to be a little bit mean, and if there is a financial implication to something, or you regard something as costing too much, then it's okay to say no. You can come up with some other reason, you're busy or whatever, but don't spend money if you don't have to spend money. And maybe it's worth raising the issue of money. The moon is trine Uranus, and just raising the issue of money might seem surprising, might even seem a bit shocking, but it might actually be the right thing to do, because maybe people will realize you have a point, and it won't take long before they understand that your sensible approach is worth following. So perhaps you can not just save yourself money, but you may be able to save other people money as well. Capricorn, Sun and the Moon can continue to be in your sign. Of course, with New Year's Eve, the Sun is always in Capricorn, and we've got the Moon in Capricorn as well. And the Moon is making a trine to Uranus, and I think that suggests that New Year's Eve should be quite a good day for you. I mean, I think it's a day when you have a fair amount of control, and I think you're feeling reasonably happy. And I've been a little bit negative about this New Year's Eve, but I mean, I think of the 12 signs, I think that Virgo is going to have a good day. I think that helps because Virgo is an earth sign. I think Capricorn is going to have a good day as well. So, in terms of star ratings, I said to Virgo that it's going to get, today's a 4.5 star day out of 5, and I would have said the same to you, 4 stars, 5 stars, maybe not 5 stars, but it looks to me, Capricorn, as if it is a pretty good day. And I think you're helped by the fact that the Moon is making a trine to Uranus. So with that Moon trine Uranus Capricorn, there is a certain sense of excitement. The idea that maybe you can make things happen, and at least make things happen in such a way that you feel satisfied and you feel that you're doing something useful. And so don't necessarily have fixed plans today, because something might turn up and you might want to pursue it. And if you were to pursue it, I think that you might be pleasantly surprised. And as far as relationships are concerned, the Moon is sextile Saturn. I mean, the Moon and Saturn are sort of 2 signs apart. I mean, you've got Moon in Capricorn, and you've got Aquarius in the middle, and then you've got Saturn in Pisces. So Moon sextile Saturn does indicate that you and other people are going to be getting on quite well with each other, and particularly on a one-to-one level. So if you're in a relationship, I don't see any reason why that relationship can't prosper and at least meet your expectations. And if you are socializing in a more general sense, other people might have problems, other signs might have problems, but I don't think you have an issue here. I think on a social level, you're very effective at the moment, and you can glide from one place to another, one person to another, and come over as being reasonable and sociable. And I think you have a chance perhaps to meet new people, and meet new people who could potentially be of lasting value. So, do consider what everyone has to offer. I mean, they may be able to offer entertainment, but they might also offer something else. I mean, they might be just a useful contact in terms of whatever ambitions you have in 2025. So, in terms of contacts, I think it's a good time for you when you can just find people who are on your wavelength, who share your interests. So, as far as what to do today, look, it's not going to be a super dramatic day. I don't think it's going to be a super dramatic day for anyone, but I think, Capricorn, it's just important but you make the most of whatever is available today. And in that way, I think that you'll end the year on, I think, a quietly successful note. Aquarius. Aquarius, we've got quite a lot of activity in Capricorn. We've got a sun and a moon in Capricorn. We've just had a Capricorn new moon. And Capricorn as a sign is quite secretive, at least from an Aquarian perspective. There are things that you want to hold back, and I don't think you want to reveal everything about yourself. And you may indeed go out of your way to try to keep things secret and not reveal what you're planning, and also just not revealing who you are. It's not a day where you want to reveal everything, where you want to sort of spill the emotional beans. That's absolutely not something you want to do. So that is going to have a bearing, I think, on the day's activities. And so you perhaps don't want to necessarily get too close to anyone. You don't want to sort of get cornered at some New Year's Eve party and be in a position where you feel that you're forced to explain yourself. That's not what you want. And it just may be that, like many of the signs, my suggestion perhaps is that maybe you just want to give New Year's Eve a miss. Is there really anything that you actually need to be doing if you go to any New Year's Eve events? Are you going to enjoy yourself? I think you're going to be on your guard a bit. You're not going to want to. You're not going to want to reveal things. I suppose you've also got the fact that you have a Mars-Pluto opposition. Well, it's not today. It's in a few days' time, but it's getting very close. And so we've got Pluto, the beginning of Aquarius, and we've got Mars at the beginning of Leo, Mars going retrograde in Leo, and that's the main axis of your solar chart. It could be your solar chart if you're looking at this from a perspective of your sun sign. You may be looking at this from a perspective of your ascendant, so it would be your ascendant chart. It could even be your moon chart. You can use the moon, set the moon as your ascendant. In fact, in Vedic astrology, there is a chart that one uses called the Chandra Lagna, Chandra being the moon, Lagna being the ascendant, where you set the ascendant as the moon sign. So there's nothing wrong with using the moon. But anyway, whether you're looking at this chart through the sun, the moon, the ascendant, Mars is in your opposite sign, and there is this Mars-Pluto opposition, and that might indicate that people are difficult. And it's true that this opposition isn't exact until for a few days' time, but still you may be feeling its impact, especially if you're in a highly sociable situation, like, for example, a New Year's Eve party. This is not perhaps where you necessarily want to be. And there is the possibility of perhaps people being stubborn, people trying to throw their weight around, and really trying to assert themselves, and that might just be a sort of a bit sort of irritating. And even if you haven't got many people around, there may be always someone trying to assert their authority. So I don't know if you don't want to if you don't want it to end up like, oh, was it Abigail's Party? But there was that Abigail's Party. I don't know if you saw that. It was a play which it was the 1970s play. Well, someone trying to assert themselves, and it all ending up very unpleasantly, and people not really having much to say to each other. I mean, people having to say something, but the whole thing being very uneasy. And so that could be how it all works out, how it could work out if you're not careful. And so maybe you should just honour the fact that you have got the Sun and the Moon in Capricorn in this very private part of your chart. And so why reveal? Why put yourself in a position where you need to reveal? So if you are socializing over the course of the day, try to just keep moving. I mean, I think actually you can be effective in terms of socialization, but you just don't want to stay in one place. And it may not even be the fact that it's New Year's Eve. It may just be that you can, New Year's Eve parties. It may be you can just send people messages over the internet, or call people, tell them you're alive. Maybe you haven't seen them for months, even years. Just tell them they're alive. Tell them you're alive. Sorry, and you might get an interesting response. And in fact, you can perhaps build connections, but you're not going to be able to build connections just by going to, for example, a single party with a single group of people. In a way, that would kind of be a waste. So perhaps you can go, if you're going to go to a party, probably better to go to 3 or 4 parties rather than one. Better to go to no parties than just one party. I think that's what I would say. And also, there are things you want to keep secret. So you want to kind of be in a position where you can make connections, where you can get to know people without revealing anything about yourself. So that's why I think it's probably a good idea if you keep moving, but maybe you just don't want to move at all, and perhaps you should just give New Year's Eve a miss, at least in a face-to-face sense. Perhaps you can have your New Year's Eve over the computer and over the phone. That would be perhaps a good way of spending today. And don't underestimate the conclusions you can come to. The moon is making a trine to Uranus, and it just may be that when you're on your own, when you're not being disturbed, you might have some interesting thoughts which tell you something about which tell you something about 2025. You may get ideas about actually what you want to be doing in 2025, and so it might in that sense be quite inspiring. But can you be inspired if you're surrounded by other people? Probably not. Pisces, it's an okay day, I think. I mean, I'm not saying it's going to be a spectacular day. I don't think it's going to be spectacular for anyone, but we've got the moon in Capricorn, and so with the moon in Capricorn, I think your social skills are relatively good. I think you'll know how to engage with people, and I think you'll also have a good understanding of your own boundaries. So I think you can sort of go through this evening in a way that is quite smooth, and I think you'll feel quite comfortable. And you've also got the moon making a trine to Uranus. So with moon trine Uranus, I think that you're capable of making good conversation, and you can maintain people's interest as far as is possible. So if you need to talk, you can talk. If you need to provide a bit of gentle excitement, I think that's something you can do, within limits. I mean, the moon is actually void, so the moon has has made its last aspect, which I think was the moon sextile Saturn. The moon has made its last major aspect before leaving the sign. Its major aspect to a traditional planet. So that means we don't count minor aspects. We don't count moon semi-sextile Mercury, for example, and we don't count moon trine Uranus. Although moon trine Uranus is an aspect, it's not a traditional aspect. It doesn't take away from the fact that the moon is void. Moon trine Uranus represents perhaps a little bit of excitement, but excitement that perhaps doesn't really go anywhere. So that might be how the day pans out. But if you feel that something needs to happen, if you feel that you need to assert yourself, I think that's absolutely something you can do. You can, I think, actually act quickly and responsibly. You're not going to do anything crazy, but if you need to take quick action, if you need to change things, if you need to change a situation, change a social situation, things that perhaps aren't moving, I think your actions can make a certain amount of difference. But again, not a huge difference because it's not that kind of day. But don't feel powerless. If you feel you're being ignored, or you feel that people are going in the wrong direction, you can suddenly make your presence felt, and I think that people will listen to you. People will focus on you for long enough. So that looks good. And in general, if anyone has got good social skills today, Pisces, well, I think it's you. And that's it. Those are my forecasts for the last day of the year. And now I want to consider things from the I Ching, from the I Ching's perspective. So I asked the question, what is Tuesday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was 14, which is possession in great measure. Now, some people regard 14, possession in great measure, as the most fortunate of hexagram in the book. I think perhaps a reason for this is that many people consult the I Ching, and that in terms of what they want to know about is about money and getting things. And so when you're asking about money and you get this hexagram 14, possession in great measure, you feel good. You feel it's really going to happen. But it's not just possession in great measure in terms of money. It's also in terms of what you have and what is in your possession already. Perhaps it is a reminder that there are a lot of things already in your possession. Whether it's your abilities, what you're good at, your friends, your happiness, your security. There are perhaps a lot of things to complain about, but maybe we shouldn't complain. However modest, for example, your situation might be, perhaps the message here with 14, possession in great measure, is sort of count your blessings. Hey, you made it to the last day of the year. That is certain. That in a way, that's possession. You've still got your life, but possession in great measure overall is a good hexagram, and it perhaps is a time when you can increase your possessions. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean money. It can be friends, it can be skills, it can be knowledge, it can be spiritual possession. I suppose when you're... Sorry, I don't mean possession as in The Exorcist. So spiritual possession doesn't sound too good in that sense, does it? So I'm not talking about that kind of possession. Being possessed. Of course one can always be possessed by one's possessions. I suppose one can get so obsessed with one's money, but one can be possessed by it, or possessed by what we have. Sort of my precious, as in, Lord of the Rings. We don't want that kind of possession, do we? But there are some moving lines here which perhaps give us some indications about what this hexagram is about. Now, the third from a bottom moves. Now, it is a good hexagram in general, but the third from a bottom is perhaps somewhat difficult. It maybe indicates that we go too far in some area, or we do something perhaps that is inappropriate to our station. There's certainly a warning here about showing off our possessions, even if it's an act of generosity. I mean, generosity is a good thing in general, I suppose. But there is a danger here perhaps of over-generosity, or being generous in a way that reveals our hand, that shows what we have. And it just is possible that an act of generosity backfires. And so I don't know what your plans are for today, but it's not a day for giving people expensive gifts, for example. It's not a day for doing anything extravagant. It's not a day for showing off your wealth. I mean, remember, however much you have, there's always someone who has got more than you. And what the I Ching actually talks about is the difference between a wealthy man providing, for example, a party for a king, and a prince or someone in the royal family providing a party for a king. It may be appropriate for a prince to provide a party for a king, but it is not appropriate for a wealthy person to provide a party for a king, because they're just merely wealthy. They don't have the standing. And so it may be in terms of being generous. If you feel you need to be overly generous, it's almost like you don't have the standing to be generous. It's in itself might seem like a nice thing to do, but actually it's not appropriate. It is not the right thing to do, because again, you don't have the standing to do it. So that's one way of looking at it. But it's also saying a different approach to this third line is it's distinguishing between being magnanimous and petty. We mustn't be too focused on our wealth. I mean, we're all wealthy to some extent. We all have things, but we mustn't be too focused on what we have. We mustn't be mean. We mustn't be just focusing on money or some other possession just for the sake of it. It could be knowledge. We might be mean with our knowledge. We might just hold it back. And there is a place for magnanimity, but magnanimity mustn't reach the point of just inappropriate generosity. So we absolutely have to get that balance right. And then the top line moves. And the top line moves, actually it's quite a good line. And top line moves is that if we are modest about what we have, but we are, I suppose, magnanimous, then it suggests that we receive heaven's blessing. So if we treat our possessions in the right way, and we have the right attitude to our possessions, then indeed we are going to have heaven's blessing. And so that's pretty good in terms of how we behave. So it's all about perhaps how we use our possessions. There is a right way to use our possessions, and there's a wrong way. And I think that this I Ching is really illustrating this. And then this line moves, because we've got two moving lines. It moves to hexagram 54, which is the marrying maiden. And the marrying maiden is telling us not to be in a hurry. And it's also telling us to be wary of other people in a hurry, because the symbolism of a marrying maiden represents a young woman who is in a hurry to get married, and it's somehow too hasty. she's being a little bit too previous, and so this is the marrying maiden, and that may not just be about relationships. I mean, it could be about someone who is in a hurry to get married, in a hurry to form a relationship. Maybe you, maybe someone else. Things need to be slowed down, and in general, it can be about advances, how we're trying to advance, and just we mustn't be in too much of a hurry. And I suppose it's New Year's Eve. People can behave inappropriately, so that may be how the marrying maiden works out. You know, who is the marrying maiden? Yeah, is it you? Is it someone else? And so everything has to be taken slowly. And certainly, anyone who seems to be in a hurry, you need to be very cautious of this person. I mean, it may not be that they're a bad person, but the end result of their haste may not be especially fortunate. And finally, I want to look at the horoscope of Jimmy Carter. You know, he's just died, and he's died at the age of 100, so he's the longest living US president. And so there, top right, that is a picture of Jimmy Carter. We have a time of birth for Jimmy Carter. So here is his horoscope. And, you know, I do think in some respects he was a bit unlucky, but I'll come on to that. So here's his chart. Born October the 1st, 1924 in Plains, Georgia at 7 a.m. So as far as his chart is concerned, he had a sun in Libra. And the sun in Libra, one often forgets that the sun in Libra is in its fall. The sun is exalted in Aries, and it's fallen in Libra. And so there are quite a lot of Libran politicians. You know, if you think about it, I mean, Vladimir Putin is a Libra. Margaret Thatcher was a Libra. In terms of other British politics, David Cameron was a Libra. Berlusconi was a Libra. Politics, in some respects, comes naturally to Librans. But if Librans want to get into politics, they have to get it right. They have to use the Libran energy to sort of understand how people work, the balances around them. I mean, if you want to get involved in politics, you have to be very clever socially. You've got different power interests, and you've got to balance them all. And that's perhaps how the Libra works. But a word that is often used with Libra is compromise. If you try too hard to compromise, if you try to please everyone, you don't get anywhere. And this might be part of a problem with Jimmy Carter. I mean, if you look at look at Iran, for example. In terms of dealing with the crisis in Iran, I mean, he could have done things in different ways. So if he had perhaps been taking advice from someone like Richard Nixon, and Richard Nixon, I think, took the view that America betrayed the Shah. I mean, I know that the Shah's regime was horrific, that the secret police for Savak were absolutely brutal in terms of tortures and whatever. But still, from a realist perspective, the advice of someone like Richard Nixon would be, you stand by the Shah. It's the best you're going to get. And so Jimmy Carter perhaps should have done more to prop up the regime. But on the other hand, from a different perspective, when the Shah was fleeing Iran, it was up the United States. There was this question about whether or not the United States should have given the Shah sanctuary, and he decided to give the Shah sanctuary. So he didn't give full support to the Shah, but he allowed him to come to America, and that was one of the reasons of a hostage crisis. So maybe he was a little bit sort of indecisive in terms of dealing with Iran. And Iran is, of course, seen as being his major foreign policy failure of all the things, and the hostage crisis and the aborted attempt to rescue those hostages, which was a real mess. So that's his sun in Libra. Perhaps you have to make a clear decision. And if sun in Libra sits on the fence, it can be disastrous. And indeed, if sun in Libra tries to be too nice, and he doesn't just have the sun the sun fallen, he also has the moon fallen. So he's got the sun fallen and the moon fallen because he has the moon in Scorpio. And so you could say with sun in Libra, moon in Scorpio, the light fallen is really not good, is it? It does suggest that there is something unfortunate about him. Of course, you could say he's very fortunate. He was a successful peanut farmer. He became governor of Georgia. He became president. He lived to 100. I think he even got a Nobel Prize of some kind, didn't he? Did he get a Nobel Peace Prize? I think he did. So you could say, in some respects, he's, as a human being, very successful. Yet he did have to manage that sun in Libra and the moon in Scorpio. So as far as him living to 100 is concerned, I mean, I know people are living longer, but what do you associate living a long time with? I mean, in a way, it might have something to do with the malefics and the fact that he's got perhaps strong Mars and Saturn. I mean, the reason his Mars and Saturn are strong, well, his Saturn is in Scorpio which is in the sign of Mars. Mars rules Scorpio, and Mars is in Aquarius. Saturn rules Aquarius. So he's got a Mars-Saturn mutual reception, and that may actually have helped him live a long time, strange as that might sound. It's like if someone has got a lot of planets in the 8th house, that often can be traditionally a sign of living a long time. It's just somehow the 8th house is a house of death, but you've got lots of planets in the house of death. You're sort of familiar with the whole concept and you can handle it, and you just live a long time. So that is a possibility. Now, that Saturn, in his Vedic, if you looked at his chart from a Vedic perspective, that Saturn would go back into Libra. So he would have Saturn in Libra in the first house in a Vedic chart, and of course Saturn is exalted in Libra. So in his Vedic chart, he'd have a Moon-Saturn conjunction in Libra rising, and that might actually help him in terms of him, being powerful and being successful. Of course, in his Vedic chart, the Moon would no longer be in Scorpio; it would be in Libra, and in his Vedic chart, the Moon would be ruler of the 10th house. So you could say ruler of the 10th house in the first house, conjunct an exalted Saturn, may explain why he was so successful politically. And regardless of his presidency, I know he wasn't one of the greatest presidents, but he did get to be president. So that in itself is quite an achievement. So those are a couple of things about his chart. He's got Jupiter in Sagittarius. I mean, it's kind of nice to have Jupiter in Sagittarius. I mean, I know 1 in 12 people have it, but Jupiter is in its own sign, and so that perhaps gives him a certain amount of magnanimity. And Jupiter square Uranus, I mean, Jupiter square Uranus, there are things he wants. He has aspirations. Jupiter square Uranus is about sort of freedom and so forth. So those are a few words about his chart. But that Moon in Scorpio. Remember, Moon is in the Via Combustor. I mean, I know one doesn't normally look at the Via Combustor in terms of personal charts. At least I don't. But when you've got the moon in a Via combustor, it can be just about things happening. Things happening are perhaps out of your control. And, you know, if you're talking about a Via combustor event, then I suppose the hostage crisis is pretty Via combustor. Also, his attempt to rescue the hostages, it was just a disaster. I mean, I don't know whether the plan had any real chance of success, but I think two aircraft crashed into each other. You know, that's something mere moon in a Via combustor. So it was pretty difficult. And now, as far as his luck is concerned, I would argue that one of the reasons he was unlucky, and you can talk about his own mistakes, but I think one of the reasons he was unlucky was because when he was elected. So if you are elected in a year ending in 6, and I'm thinking particularly of sort of recent history in America. So if you look at all the elections ending in 6, it tends not to work very well for that incoming party. So, for example, Woodrow Wilson and Woodrow Wilson's Democrats won in 1916, ending in 6, and the Republicans beat them in 1920. And this links with the Jupiter-Saturn cycle, because you tend to have the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction around the time you have 0 years. So, 2020 we had a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. Around 1920, 1921 there was a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. And the conjunction represents the new beginning. It's the new Jupiter-Saturn cycle. So if you're elected, and a president elected in a year ending in 6, you're elected right at the end of the Jupiter-Saturn cycle. You're elected at the end of the old cycle. You're elected at the end of the dying cycle. And so as that Jupiter-Saturn conjunction starts to become exact at the end of your term, you're out of date and people want something else. So, Woodrow Wilson being elected in 1916, things were about to change. Warren Harding elected in 1920, that's the beginning of a roaring 20s. That's a completely new way of looking at things. It's not about the First World War anymore. It's about America and economic growth and the roaring 20s, and this was kind of destined to happen. Now, FDR, I suppose because of the depths of the recession, he was elected in 1936, and he was elected again in 1940. So the problem of the year ending in 6 wasn't a problem for FDR when he was elected in 1936, because he won in 1940. But then you move on. The Republicans won in 1956. You had Eisenhower as the president, Nixon as his vice president, and Nixon lost in 1960 because it was 1960. It was a new beginning. It was the 60s. And so all that stuff from the 50s, which Nixon represented, you don't need that anymore. And so, of course, Nixon lost. Then you move to the next cycle. Let's skip the 1970s cycle. But if you think about Clinton winning in 1996 and then a Democrat standing again in 2000. But with 2000, it was new decade, new century, something different. The Clinton years were over. We're moving on to something else. And even with Trump, he got elected in 2016. And now we have 2020. Different era, supposedly. Although the 2020 is a bit strange. Perhaps it's a messed up cycle. But still, it's true. Trump was elected in 2016 and he lost in 2020. So it kind of worked. But I'm not sure if 2020 was sort of a brand new era. It almost seems to be breaking down. But anyway, going back to Carter. He was elected in 1976. This was very much the old world. He was elected into sort of sort of the world of sort of full employment, where full employment was expected, and the old sort of Keynesian way of doing things, and people thought that, you know, government was your friend, and also he was elected at a time of high inflation. I mean, what could he do about it? So he was kind of unlucky. Plus, you had a very complicated world, complicated in terms of the Middle East and the oil price and so forth. So perhaps he didn't have a chance. So perhaps it wasn't really his fault. But still, getting elected right at the end of a Jupiter-Saturn cycle can be really difficult. Now, as far as his presidency is concerned, I would have said that his presidency really started to go wrong in 1979, and so here's his solar return for 1979. I'm not saying it's in itself particularly bad, but so if you think about what happened on October the 1st, 1969, so 1979, the end of 1979, things fell apart. You could say that Paul Volcker's Saturday Night Special was on October the 6th, 5 days after his 55th birthday. So this was his 55th birthday. So Paul Volcker, appointed by Jimmy Carter, but you could say Paul Volcker's increase of interest rates. Paul Volcker basically crashed the American economy in order to save America from inflation, and he sort of paved the way for Reagan. But Paul Volcker's Saturday Night Special was 5 days after Jimmy Carter's 55th birthday. And this is, I've looked at this chart quite recently when I'm looking at the Federal Reserve, when Paul Volcker, as chairman of the Federal Reserve, had this press conference on Saturday, October the 6th, in which he announced what they were going to do, the beginning of a massive increase in interest rates, which they went up to 20% in the end over a period of a couple of years. And you could say that this was the beginning, and so this was kind of undermining American employment. It was putting up interest rates. So it's not the kind of environment you want to stand for a second term on. And so that was the first thing that went wrong. Then, of course, the second thing that went wrong was the hostage crisis. So those first hostages were taken on sort of November the 4th. I make it the real demonstration started at sort of 6:30 a.m. So what was it about Carter turning 55 which caused so many problems? So looking at Carter's chart, you could attempt to use annual profections. I mean, annual profections are, I think they are a powerful technique, although I think that a lot of people were using annual profections to try to predict that Kamala Harris was going to win the election. I don't quite know what went wrong there. I suppose maybe they were not going into sufficient depth, or just looking at whatever they needed to look at in order to find a path astrologically for Kamala Harris to win and for Trump to lose. So if we turn to Jimmy Carter's chart. So he turned 55 on October the 1st, 1979, and so that would mean that if we take annual profections, we take the ascendant repeats every 12 years. So he's got Libra rising, so Libra would cover him for his 48th birthday, so because 48 is divisible by 12, so you move 6 years, so that's 54. So basically it's his profected ascendant is going to be Taurus, so his annual ruler would have been Venus. And I think we can see the problems here. He has a Moon-Saturn conjunction in Scorpio. Okay, it's a pretty wide Moon-Saturn conjunction in Scorpio, but they're still both in the same sign. And so you can see that Moon and Saturn are casting an opposition aspect to Taurus. So that's the first problem with him turning 55. That Moon-Saturn starts to become a problem because it's hitting Taurus. Second problem is that his annual ruler is Venus, and his Venus here as Venus in Libra is opposition Mars. So Venus opposition Mars, it sounds a kind of nice aspect. It's maybe charismatic. It's about sex appeal or whatever. That's one way of looking at it. But fundamentally, Venus is opposition Mars. Venus is being undermined by Mars. Mars represents the enemy. And so I would have said that perhaps his enemies really came to the fore when he turned 55, both at home and abroad. And you could say, okay, because if you're using annual profections, you kind of have to use the whole sign house system because you've got to be consistent. So sort of 55, this Taurus represents the 8th house, and so the Moon and Saturn would then be in the 2nd house. So there is a financial aspect to it, maybe, perhaps in terms of Volker's Saturday Night Special, but also enemies abroad. I suppose Venus opposition Mars, and he is the head of the United States, head of state, and so Venus opposition Mars, his enemies are becoming strong, and it's that Mars conjunct the South Node. So that was one hint that things were going wrong for him. Now, as far as the aspects were concerned, well, the solar return as well. When I looked at his solar return for 2024, for 1979, when I think things really started to go wrong, I didn't think that solar return was incredibly bad, but I suppose you've got Mars fairly close to the ascendant, Moon kind of close to Mars quite close to the descendant, Moon quite close to the ascendant. So there is sort of a Moon-Mars opposition feel to that chart. Uranus is quite close to the midheaven, so it's not exact. Of course, we have a 7 a.m. time of birth for Jimmy Carter. Was he really born at exactly 7 a.m.? That sounds rather rounded to me. So potentially we've got Uranus on the midheaven, Mars on the descendant, Moon on the ascendant. It's not exact, but there are perhaps some hints there that things aren't right. And then if we look at his converse solar return, so in other words, this solar return is that when we go 55 years after he was born. If we go 55 years before he was born, we get this is a solar return for October the 1st, 1869. And the solar return for October the 1st, 1869 is actually very difficult. You've got Uranus on the ascendant, drama, Mars exactly opposition Pluto. So that does seem hard work. Plus the Sun is exactly on the IC. So you've got the Sun exactly on the IC, Uranus exactly on the ascendant. So you've kind of got a bit of a mundane square relationship there between Sun and Uranus. So that chart set for October the 1st, 1869 really is telling that this is going to be a difficult year. And I do find, particularly with famous people, that the converse solar returns are often more powerful than the direct solar returns. And as far as transits are concerned, so looking at the chart of the beginning of the hostage crisis, let's see what kind of transits he had. So at the time of the hostage crisis, you started to have a a Saturn-Neptune square. And this Saturn-Neptune square was hitting his Mercury. So he had just had Saturn conjunct his Mercury. So as you had the Saturday night special, then you've got the hostage crisis. Broadly speaking, you had Saturn on his Mercury, and you had Neptune. In fact, the Saturn-Neptune midpoint would be hitting his Mercury. So perhaps you can see some of the stress there. And also look at Mars. Mars at the time of when the students were gathering outside the American embassy, Mars was at 22-25 Leo. So Mars was about to move on to across his Venus. Mars was about to go opposition his Mars, and this is a reminder. Mars on his Venus. Remember, from an annual profection point of view, Venus was his year ruler for the year starting on October the 1st, 1979. So Venus would have been especially vulnerable, and so Mars crossing his Venus would be difficult at the best of times, but in a year when Venus was his profection ruler, that Mars hitting his Venus would have been especially difficult. So always look at transits to that. I mean, if you remember with Kamala Harris, a lot of people were excited about her annual profection. She would just turn 60, and she had Gemini rising, and so people thought Jupiter moving through Gemini, that was great. That was almost evidence in itself that she was going to win. But what people forgot, or some people seemed to forget, was that the ruler of Kamala Harris's ascendant was Mercury. She had Mercury in early Scorpio, and Mars was making a square to her Mercury. So there's actually a link there, there's a sort of a link there between Kamala Harris's disaster of losing an election when Mars was square her annual ruler, and here Mars was conjunct Jimmy Carter's annual ruler, which was Venus. And you can look at other things. You can look at the moon was at 9 Taurus, so moon was moving towards so later in that day, moon was opposition to sun, and that was when the hostage crisis came into being. And so there was a full moon on the day of the hostage crisis, and that full moon was at 11 Scorpio, and that full moon was right across his full moon at 11 Taurus, which was opposition his Scorpio moon. So you can see the pressure rising. And then I think perhaps another really bad day for Jimmy Carter was the attempt to rescue the hostages. And I seem to remember some Ayatollah or some mullah or some priest picking up body parts of someone who'd been killed in this attempt to rescue. I mean, it was just a disaster. It happened for some reason I've got April 24th, 1980 at 10:47 p.m. I'm not quite sure where I got that time from. So this was this attempt where the Americans sent in special forces by plane to land in Iran to go and rescue the hostages. This was the big plan, and it really was a complete disaster. I don't know about the timing of the chart, but you can see that Mars was conjunct the North Node. So at the time, so I suppose you could say Mars conjunct the North Node was a good time to launch this attempt to rescue the hostages. But the moon, what's the moon doing? The moon is separating from the conjunction to Jupiter. In the end, it would make the square to Neptune, the conjunction to Saturn. But again, you see this Saturn-Neptune square, which was dogging Jimmy Carter in the last part of his presidency, and also. That Mars is really interesting because it actually links with the United States chart. So if we look at the United States' chart, I mean, this was a major humiliation for America, the hostage rescue. And so if we put the USA chart on the inner wheel and the hostage rescue on the outer wheel, you can see that Mars, United States has its moon at 2710 Aquarius, and so Mars, and in fact, this Mars conjunct the North Node was exactly opposition. America's moon. I suppose moon represents the people, but it's also, I mean, I suppose in this case it was a sense of sort of national humiliation. And look, the United States had its black moon Lilith at 27.7, true black moon Lilith at 27.7 Leo. So Mars was conjunct America's black moon Lilith, opposition America's moon. You know, where was Joan Quigley when she needed it? Would Joan Quigley have allowed this to happen? Well, of course, Joan Quigley was, of course, Reagan's astrologer. She wasn't Carter's astrologer. Maybe if Carter had had an astrologer, things wouldn't have been quite so bad. But I think there was something rather sort of fated about this. It just wasn't. His presidency really was not going to proceed. And you know, we talk about his Venus-Mars opposition and the fact that his opponents were everywhere. I mean, he had opponents, it wasn't just the Iranians. I mean, Edward Kennedy wanted to stand against him. There was talk in terms of the primaries. Normally it's automatic when a president, a sitting president wants to stand again. He's just, he immediately gets waved through, but Kennedy wanted to stand against him. And I think there was a lesson there which perhaps the Democrats hadn't learnt in 2024. Unseating Biden, that was a sure sign Biden wasn't going to win. I mean, didn't they learn from what happened in 1980? But apparently not. Or 1979, 80, whenever Edward Kennedy started to talk about standing against Jimmy Carter. And I just wanted to quickly look at the link between Jimmy Carter and that failed hostage rescue. And that failed hostage rescue really was a real low point. And you know, there again with this failed hostage rescue, you know, Mars still pretty close to Carter's Venus, and there's Carter's Mercury. You see, Carter's Mercury is now getting really, really hammered by Saturn. So Saturn was right on Carter's Mercury, and Neptune was square Carter's Mercury. So Carter would, of course, made the final decision about whether to proceed with this rescue, and he made that decision. And he made this decision when Saturn was conjunct his Mercury, and of course, the decision didn't help him in terms of the 1980 election, and as we know, he lost the 1980 election. So anyway, those are a few thoughts about Carter. I think I've tried to demonstrate that he was an unlucky president, and things just did not work out for him. He was a president in difficult times, and he was elected in 1976, right at the end of the Jupiter-Saturn cycle, and you know, by 1980, you know, we had a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in Libra. It was something new. It was a new era. It was Ronald Reagan's time. So perhaps he never really had a chance, but still, he did live to 100, and that perhaps is a great achievement. Anyway, that's all I'm going to say on Jimmy Carter. I hope you found this video of some interest. If you enjoyed this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. If you want to buy me a coffee, there is a link in the description. So thanks again for watching, and Happy New Year, and I'll talk to you tomorrow on January the 1st.